Babylon, man, I've been so torn thinking about this world lately. Babylon, truth is so eluded and it drives me crazy. Babylon, this lost world is so hopeless. Babylon, Jesus Christ, that's where hope is. Babylon, no matter what they say, it's still so lost.
He sitteth between the cherubims. Let the earth be moved. The Lord is great in Zion. He is high above all the people. Let them praise thy great and terrible name, for it is holy. The king's strength also loveth judgment. Thou dost establish equity. Thou executest judgment and righteousness in Jacob. Exalt ye the Lord our God, and worship at his footstool, for he is holy. Moses and Aaron among his priests, and Samuel among them that call upon his name. They called upon the Lord, and he answered them. He spake unto them in the cloudy pillar, and they kept his testimonies, and the ordinances that he gave them. Thou answered them, O Lord our God. Thou wast the God that forgavest them, though thou tookest vengeance of their inventions. Exalt the Lord our God, and worship at his holy hill, for the Lord our God is holy. That is Psalm 99.
And this is the Resisting Balaam podcast, a podcast where we seek to encourage the saints to stand firm with him on his word against all of the accusations made by the world, the flesh, and the devil, as we engage a culture of death that demands the sacrifice of our children. I am Pastor Darren. That was Pastor Callie. This is a Wrath and Grace podcast. I want to encourage you to check out more about Wrath and Grace at facebook.com/Wrath and Grace. They're still working on updating their app, so once that gets done and up and running, we'll have an announcement here for that. Also want to encourage everybody to check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/Resisting Balaam. That's where you can support our ministry. So you can support the ministry for as little as $3 a month or as much as $20 a month. When you become a supporter, you get access to early content. You get access to special member-only content. And then depending upon what tier you come in at, you also get some special Resisting Balaam merch. You can get a Matt logo like this guy right here. Also, we got some T-shirts on there. And then you get Kelly's book and a sticker, which I had one of those floating around here somewhere, but my desk is messy. So all kinds of different things you can get depending upon what tier you come in at. When you become a member of our Patreon, you're helping us with our ministry. Callie and I are traveling all over the country right now, trying to promote and advance the cause of the abolition of abortion. And so we really appreciate our patrons, because part of what you guys do helps us to expand our podcast platform by being able to travel places and speak and things like that. And so, man, one big thing we got coming up, Callie, is this Still Standing conference here in Indianapolis in a couple of weeks here.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that one. There's going to be some great speakers at that. You're going to be there with some
Yep.
shirts and some books.
Yes.
People
Correct.
keep asking me where they can get your book at. They can get it on Amazon, but if you
Right.
come to Indianapolis, you can walk away with a copy of it right there. So, and what are you talking about on that? I butchered the title of your talk.
Yeah,
last
you did. You
I
did.
messed it all up.
I'm speaking on Christian liberty and the regulative principle of worship, which is the freedom from the imposition of man's invention in worship.
Yeah. That's why I butchered it, because I don't even know what half of that means. So, I'm looking forward to hearing that talk. I'm going to be talking about the doctrine of interposition as a Reformation doctrine, and so we'll talk about that. And then there's several other great speakers there as well. Justin Peters is going to be there. Andrew Rappaport's going to be there. Brandon Scalf is the guy who runs the thing. If you're not following Brandon on Cruciform Ministries, he's a good brother. He's faithful at the abortion mills here in Indiana. Definitely check out his ministry. He's going to be speaking there as well. Cameron Gray is an abolitionist pastor here in Indiana. He's going to be speaking there. So there's going to be a lot of great speakers there. So join us. And you can find out more about that at Cruciform, on the Cruciform. If you go to facebook.com/ I think it's Cruciform Ministries. You can find out more about that there. We'll post a link when we post the video. So That's one big thing, and then we got one other event that I wanted to mention, and then you can, if there's anything else you wanted to mention, we could do that too. But we have the Operation Save America National event coming up as well, and so the dates on these things. I'm terrible at dates and times, but
Yeah.
that event's going to be in Arizona. So if you're in that area, come out and join us. Callie's going to have a table there as well, and I'll be speaking at that event a little bit. And then we're transitioning. Pastor Rusty is retiring, and Jason Stroms will be stepping in as national director. I'll be stepping in as assistant national director along with Lucas Childress. So that's going to be a big event, and we'll be at that as well. What were the dates for those?
I think that's the third weekend in June.
Yeah, it's like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday for that, and then the Cruciform Conference is the first weekend in June, if I remember right.
Yes.
So yeah, come catch us at both of those events. And then did you have? I got another event in September in Chicago. Do you have anything else that you wanted to bring
Yeah,
up?
sure. On June 26th, Saturday, up at the Austin State Capitol, we're going to be singing a bunch of psalms and praying and reading scripture. So come join us out there. We have an event page, and we're posting the psalms that we're singing. So
Yeah.
start practicing.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, I saw that. I'm excited about that. I wish I could make it down there for that, but so many things going on. But you guys got a lot of great things happening down there in Texas right now, in terms of abolitionists coming together and things like that. So I'm excited for that. All right, we started all that out to say thank you to our patrons for helping us be able to travel to some of these things that we're doing and spread the mission and vision of the abolition of abortion. So thank you guys, our patrons. And if you're not a patron yet, go check it out, patreon.com/resisting Balaam. Okay. All right, cool. So this is going to be a good discussion, I think. So Callie, I'll let you go ahead and introduce our guest, and we'll get into it here.
Right. So this week we have a returning guest. He'd been on before a long time ago, last year, pretty much right as we first started. It's our friend from Free the States, James Silberman, and he's here to talk to us today about strategy, paradigm shifts, and things like this. James, why don't you give us a little introduction about yourself?
Yeah. Thanks so much, you guys, for having me. So my name's James. I work for Free the States. We are an abolitionist lobbying organization here in Oklahoma. We are certainly interested in supporting abolition wherever there's abolitionist stuff going on. And so we're involved in different things, speaking to legislators in different places. But most of what we do is in Oklahoma because that's where we are. And so yeah, we've been kind of hand to the plow here. I've been doing it for about I guess 2+ years now as an abolitionist, and then before that I was just kind of a pro-lifer doing the pro-life thing with a couple different pro-life organizations for a while. And I would encourage people, I think it was episode 2, right, that me and Austin came on and talked about. Yeah. So people can kind of go back and watch that episode if they want kind of the full story there, about how I kind of left the pro-life movement and became an abolitionist, and the interactions there within the pro-life movement after I become an abolitionist and kind of how all that went down. It was it wasn't a super fun time, but it was definitely a time where I grew a lot, learned a lot, kind of a lot of things I learned through that whole process that kind of informed kind of what we're going to talk about today. It's been about a 5-year journey of fighting abortion. I'm passionate about this. I know you guys are too. I really appreciate you guys and all the things you guys are doing, and I'm excited to get into the topic here.
Awesome. Well, James, we're excited to have you on the podcast, man. I'm looking forward to having this discussion with you here. And so basically what we're going to be talking about today, a few weeks back, we interviewed Zach Lautenschlager, who's a political operative and has lots of experience in political activism. And we had a really great conversation with him. And one of the things that he talked about over the course of his interview was this idea that we have enough people out there in the pro-life movement that agree with us. And so basically what we need to do if we want to win this fight is we just need to go out and get those people and get them engaged on our side of the battle. Well, James is a regular listener to our podcast, and obviously he's faithful in this fight. and he works with Free the States at this point. And so if you follow the Free States Facebook page, one of the things that you'll notice is that their perspective on that is very different. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to give James an opportunity to come on and provide the counterbalance to that discussion and share sort of his side, what his thoughts are on the idea of how we as abolitionists should interact with the pro-life movement. How do we go about recruiting and pulling them into what we're doing? And his perspective was a little bit different than Zach's perspective. So we wanted to give him an opportunity to come on and share his perspective. So James, just let's go ahead and start the discussion. Why don't you just lay out for us, just to start with, your general understanding of how should we be as abolitionists, how should we interact with the pro-life movement? What are the things that we should be doing to reach out, in particular to our Christian brothers and sisters who really know Jesus, who really want to end abortion, but they think that what's happening over there, that's the way to do it. You have a unique perspective on this because you actually come from that. That's where you were at. And so really we want to hear, based on your experience, how should we as abolitionists be engaging with people that are like you were 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was.
Yeah, so I want to start off by saying that there are things that I appreciate about Zach, and I think there are some good things he's doing. I think that bill in South Carolina, I know Zach had a big part in getting the bill introduced there, and I know he's talking to people in Alabama about getting the bill introduced in Alabama, and so I appreciate a lot of what Zach's doing. I'm not just coming out against Zach and saying Zach's bad. That's not what I'm here to do at all. But I am here just to like you said, to give the opposite perspective on whether or not we need to be kind of drawing a strong line between pro-life and abolition, and then calling people to cross it, as opposed to more of Zach's view, which is kind of don't draw that line because it may kind of offend people and prevent them from maybe supporting your bill or coming to your rally or something like that. And so that's I'm not here to bash Zach at all. I'm just here to kind of give the other side of that disagreement within the abolitionist movement. Now, as you mentioned, kind of Zach's position is that you've got to reach people where they are, and so he talked about on the podcast episode. He talked about emphasizing the sameness that you have with people, kind of find common ground, and then work with people based on that common ground. Now, I think the error there is that there aren't enough people out there who really agree with us on what we need them to agree with us on, and what we need them to agree with us on is that the pro-life strategy is what is delaying abolition. And so we're not going to be able to abolish abortion until we take away the politicians' ability to compromise. For as long as they're able to compromise, they're going to compromise because it's the easier thing to do. As long as they can pass 20-week bans and ultrasound bills and waiting period laws and all these things, they're going to do that instead of abolition. And so in order to get them to do the hard thing, you've got to take away their ability to do the easy thing. Now, that necessarily means a lot of confrontation and saying, no, this bill is bad. This bill that the pro-life politicians and lobbyists and churches and even all the well-meaning probably people out there, these bills that you guys are working for and praying for and all this stuff, they're bad, and we need to stop supporting this because it's what is allowing them to get away with not abolishing abortion. Now, that's a very confrontational thing, and I think that is what kind of turns Zach off, all the amount of friction and confrontation between the pro-life and abolitionist movement. But I think that's just undeniably necessary. So here in Oklahoma, on the day that they voted down Warren Hamilton's abolition bill in committee, the day they voted that down, they passed 6 pro-life bills out of the exact same committee on the same day, right? And the reason they passed so many of these pro-life bills is because they need those to point to say, look at how pro-life we are, and that's how they get reelected. And so you're not going to be able to get them to do the thing you want them to do unless you take away their ability to do everything that allows them to get away with not doing it. In Texas, Callie, where you are, I think Texas Right to Life put out an article defending Stephanie Click, saying that she passed it was an all-time record 12 pro-life bills out of her committee, and she was the one who prevented abolition from even being heard.
Yeah, and to go along with that, I talked to her chief of staff and on the phone, and one of the reasons, or the second reason he gave for not hearing our abolition bill was the fact that they heard 11 pro-life
Right.
bills, and that was the reasoning, and he explicitly says that we're not going to hear this bill because we heard these 11 pro-life bills.
Right.
So I mean, there is something to what you're saying on
Yeah.
that.
And that necessarily is going to be very offensive to a lot of pro-lifers, and all the pro-life groups are gonna yelp that we're not team players, and that we're trying to harm their efforts and all this stuff. And that to someone who's been in politics and who thinks in that world and has been in that world and has even seen a lot of success in that world, that controversy and offensiveness is not going to seem right. And I understand from his perspective how that makes sense for someone who's been in the political world. But for this issue in particular, I think even as a distinct issue from like the fight for the Second Amendment, I think it is the compromise that is preventing it. And I'm not sure if there would be agreement with Zach on that point. And one of the reasons I'm not sure he agrees with that, if you go to to actionforlife.com, and again, I'm not bashing Action for Life at all. They're doing good stuff. But if you go to their website, like the politicians that they kind of promote as kind of the champions of the movement are all politicians who also support incremental legislation. So like Nathan Dahm here in Oklahoma, or Kurt Knisley up there in Indiana. Those are good guys. They support abolition. They co-author abolition bills, and that's great. We love that. But again, the foundational problem is that even those guys who are supporting abolition are still supporting these pro-life bills that allow the politicians to not abolish abortion. And so, yes, should we kind of use the fact that we agree with Nathan Dahm and Kurt Knisley and Brian Slayton and all these guys? Should we use the fact that there is common ground on supporting abolition to kind of get in the door and try to converse with them further? Absolutely. And they're good guys, and we don't want to just bash those guys at all. We appreciate that they have taken a lot of hits for the stand that they've taken, and we want to honor them and give credit where credit is due. But we also don't want to just kind of ignore the fact that on the side they're also supporting the very thing that's preventing us from successfully being able to save all the babies from abortion. And so whereas Zach would emphasize the common ground and kind of not bring in the fact that they're also doing bad things over here, we would say, yes, we do appreciate it that you're doing this, and we have. We told people to send emails to Nathan Dahm after he voted for abolition last year, and we appreciated that. And we again give credit where credit's due. But we're also going to tell him, you've got to stop supporting these bills. These bills are undercutting everything that we're trying to do. Whereas I don't think Zach would want to say that, because that might offend Nathan Dahm and might not make him want to meet with us anymore. And so, yeah, there just is a difference on whether or on how strongly we need to oppose the pro-life efforts. I don't think we're going to succeed until enough of the people see that the pro-life thing is a game, that the politicians are playing us, that they put forward these, bill after bill after bill after bill in order to delay abolition. I don't think we're going to get where we need to get until enough people realize that. Whereas Zach, I think, thinks that you just kind of need, people don't need to realize that. They just need to kind of come out and support the rally and not kind of understand, all the things going on behind the scenes. And that's, I guess that's kind of the heart of the disagreement.
Let me ask a question, because I think as we're discussing this, one of the things that can happen is we start equivocating on who we're talking about when we're talking about pro-life people. Right. Some of the time when you were talking, you were specifically talking about pro-life legislators, pro-life organization heads, right. And then other times you seem to be talking about just Christian citizens in general that hold to a pro-life position. I think there's a distinction that we need to make in that part of the discussion, because we ought not talk to just the average Christian pro-life person the same way that we would say, Bob Hall,
right?
The senator in Texas, right? And like you said, hey, we're about telling you you did a good thing. You proposed a bill to ignore Roe. That's awesome. Thank you. We want to get behind it.
Yep.
Now you stand up at a podium to talk not just about
Yep.
that, but your other pro-life bills, and you get booed from the stage. I mean, that's what happens. But let's can you talk about this distinction that we need to make between our interaction with the institution, you know, the leadership, the politicians, and is there a breakdown on some politicians we need to be a little bit more soft with it as we talk to them versus others, and all of that in contrast to, you know, Miss Jones who lives next
Right.
door that is pro-life because she loves babies.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. A really important distinction to make. So I think your average pro-life politician or average pro-life, you know, person who works for a pro-life organization, I think they're much harder to reach because they're so entrenched in what they're doing. They're so emotionally invested in what they're doing. And so the way that we speak to them is a very different way than we speak to the average pro-life person. The average pro-life person also doesn't understand, as you know, as we talked about, understand all the things that are necessarily going on behind the scenes, that the pro-life organizations are opposing abolition. And so it is a much softer conversation, and we don't want to conflate those well-meaning people with, you know, the Greg Treats of the world, who are actively, you know, politicians who are actively fighting against abolition. And so we want to distinct pro-life people from, you know, pro-life politicians and lobbyists in the way that we talk about them. And I think abolitionists, I think there are a lot of abolitionists who communicate really well, and I think there are a lot of abolitionists who do conflate those two things and kind of speak of all pro-life people as if they were, you know, Greg Treat who's keeping abortion legal. And so, yeah, it's a very important distinction to make. Now, the question is, how do we reach the average pro-life person and get them solidly on board with our cause? Do we do that by saying, you know, we're pro-lifers, but we're just more pro-life than the other pro-lifers, or we're the true pro-lifers? Is that how we get them to agree with our, you know, ideological positions, or do we draw a line between pro-life and abolition and then ask the well-meaning pro-life person to see, here's what is over here on this side of the line, here's what we believe over here on this side of the line, you should cross this line and be with us? And I think Bradley Pierce talked about this at our conference here in Oklahoma in February. I think he did a really good job, made a really good point. Is it true in some sense to say that, you know, the three of us are Catholic? Sure. In some sense, we're Catholic. We're part of the universal church. But is it helpful to go around calling ourselves Catholics? No, not really, because then people are going to think something other than what we're trying to communicate, and we're going to cause a confusion between Roman Catholic doctrine and, I guess, Protestant or specifically Reformed Protestant doctrine, and it's going to cause the line between those doctrines, those theologies, to be blurred, and people to not be able to distinguish clearly between them. Now, I believe it's very, very, very important that people understand the clear doctrinal and political positions that abolitionists hold, as opposed to the clear doctrinal and political positions that pro-lifers hold. I think that's very, very important for them to be able to see those things clearly. And it's not going to be helpful for them to agree with us ideologically if we're not using terminology that emphasizes that there is a distinction between our doctrines and political strategies and pro-life doctrines and political strategies. And so is it true to say that, you know, that all of us here and all abolitionists in some sense are pro-life? Yes, we support life. But more specifically, we're calling for the abolition of abortion. And more specifically, we want people to agree with certain doctrines and strategies as opposed to pro-life incremental doctrines and strategies. And so when it comes time for them to vote for, say, like a Warren Hamilton, an abolitionist candidate for Senate, or Larry Boggs, who is the incumbent pro-life Republican candidate for Senate here in Oklahoma, we want them to clearly know, here is what Warren Hamilton stands for, this, and this. Abolition of abortion, not regulation. And here's what Larry Boggs stands for as a pro-lifer. And then them to be able to think, okay, here's the abolition side, here's the pro-life side, I need to go with the abolition side. And unless there's a clear line between those two things, it's just a fight for who's more pro-life, Larry Boggs or Warren Hamilton. That's a battle that we probably don't have a great chance to win. It's hard to out pro-life national right to life, right? They've owned that word for 40 years, and they're going to send out a whole bunch of mailers saying that Larry Boggs is 100% pro-life and Warren Hamilton is going to oppose all pro-life legislation, right? That's a hard thing to beat. Like, I don't think Warren would have won if he would have just tried to say, well, I'm more pro-life, don't believe national right to life. I'm a real pro-life candidate. The reason he won is because he drew a distinction. He said, no, yeah, all these things they're saying about me not being in support of those pro-life things, that's true. But it's because I'm for the total and immediate abolition of abortion, and that's what I'm running to do. I'm not running to regulate it. I'm running to abolish it completely as an abolitionist. And that helps people see there's a clear distinction here, and I need to go on this side of that distinction. If he had run as a pro-lifer, I think things would have gotten blurred, and Larry Boggs had 4 times as much money as Warren did, and Warren would not have won. But it was the distinction to help people know this is the line I need to cross. I need to be on this side of it. And you lose that if you're not willing to draw that to draw that distinction. And so yeah, I think it's really important.
Cool. All right. So we're at the 25-minute mark right now. So now seems like a good time. We'll take a quick break here. We'll run out and do our street ministry segment, and then we'll come back. And I got some questions that I want to ask just for clarifying purposes when we get back to the other side of the break. So let's do a quick break here. We'll run out to the street ministry, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up this discussion with our guest, James Silberman.
Well, there was a time when me and a buddy of mine, his name was John Lewis, awesome guy, we met in the Air National Guard. And then I would get out of the Air National Guard, and years later, I would run into him. I was the Bible guy at Mardell Christian Bookstore in Midwest City. And we got together and we started going to a coffee shop in Midwest City that was owned by a Christian guy. And they would have bands there at night, and it would draw out all kinds of people. And that was in the days when goth was coming on strong. And so me and John would go out there now and then, and we would just try to strike up conversations with people, because we were big into Francis Schaeffer and stuff like that. And so we were big into like coffee shop. That's my kid. We're big into coffee shop, just talking to people. We'd start conversations like, do you believe in truth? And we tried to lead things towards talking to them about, Christ. And so, but there was one night that both of us had gotten off work. He got off from the fire station, and I got off from Mardell. And we were both really exhausted, and we said, hey, let's go up there and just get some coffee. Let's not do all that stuff we normally do. Let's relax tonight. I don't feel like trying to evangelize to anybody or anything like that. How do you do? Okay, did you see the blue stuff all over his lips? Well, anyway, so we decided that we're going to go up there and just listen to some music from one of the live bands and drink some coffee. And that we weren't going to do any of that evangelism, do you know Jesus, do you believe in truth stuff? Presuppositional, blah, blah, blah. We threw it all at them. And so we go up there, and we're outside, and we are doing zero. We are listening to music and drinking coffee, and these 2 girls walk up to us. We're all dressed in goth style. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, one of them just says, so I hear you're a Christian. And me and him were just like, man, we're not looking for this tonight. And then we said, yes, we're Christians. And then we just sat there. We didn't go into any of the stuff we normally do. And then she goes, well, then why? And I'm like, well, she just asked us why we're Christians. And so then we kind of go, oh, well, the Lord must be wanting us to tell our testimony. Well, anyway, in the middle of it, somehow the 2 of us divide. He starts talking to one girl, I start talking to the other girl, and the girl that I'm talking to, we start talking about Daniel and prophecy, and I'm kind of showing her how I really believe that the Bible's the Word of God, and that God's prophecies really can be seen and shown that it's really prophetic. And in the middle of me talking, all of a sudden she just starts weeping. You gotta understand, at this point, I haven't even hardly lifted a finger, really, to evangelize this girl. But just in the middle of it, she starts weeping and crying, and she says, my grandpa used to be a preacher, and these bad things have happened to me and stuff like that. But she says, but about 2 hours, something like that, before we came here, I just found out that I'm pregnant. And when I told my boyfriend, he beat me unconscious at the house. And my friends came over to cheer me up and bring me out here. And I want to give my life to God. And then she goes, I don't want to go to hell. And you gotta understand, me and this guy weren't lifting a finger hardly to try to evangelize this girl. The Lord was preparing this girl through some pretty horrible circumstances that's my kid screaming. The Lord was preparing this girl through bad circumstances that it was horrible that she was beat unconscious by her boyfriend. But through the horror of what she was going through, she came to the realization that her life choices and the way she was living didn't cut it. She didn't want that path any longer. She wanted the path of life. And so then we kind of got more serious in talking and talked to her about the Lord, about his death on the cross, that he's paid the price, and that he can bring her life to a different change. And it appears that she accepted Christ's work on the cross for her that night. And immediately after what appears to be a commitment to Christ, immediately we see her friends start persecuting her and mocking her right there the rest of the night in front of us, after this girl had been beat by her own boyfriend. So immediately her faith was tested right there from these other supposed friends. But that's a night that stands out to me about, we had been street, I guess you could call it street evangelism. It wasn't really on the street, but we'd been doing that a long time, and sometimes there was a little fruit, sometimes there wasn't. But I think that because me and this guy were willing often, the one night that we weren't actually trying, but we were accessible, the Lord just gave us a freebie. Just made it happen with us to really not hardly do anything. Now, it normally does not happen that way, but it does happen that way sometimes. And so that's kind of one of my stories of personal involvement with evangelism out there face to face with an ugly world.
We are Titus 2 women, seeking to glorify God through the teaching of younger women, biblically, to love their husbands, children, and be keepers of the home.
Not grudgingly or as a legalistic chore, but rather to joyfully sacrifice in loving their husband and children as unto the Lord.
Giving glory to God and finding joy in caring for our families in only the way wives and mothers can.
As God has blessed us with female traits that make our work in the home essential to a godly home.
All right, so we're back from the street ministry segment. Now, if you're a follower of our podcast and you're wanting to get involved in street ministry, but you just don't know how to get started, reach out to Callie or myself and let us know. We'll be happy to get some resources in your hands, do some coaching with you, and certainly share some insight with you. If you are active doing ministry on the street, we want to invite you to send a 3 to 5 minute video to the podcast. You can either send it to Callie, or you can send it to myself, and we'll get it in one of our episodes. And we always need more of those because we use them every week. So if you're active in the streets, you've been doing evangelism either in front of abortion clinics or at sporting events or whatever else the case may be, reach out to us and share one of your videos with us, and we'll take it from there. All right, so James, couple things I wanted to come back to. Listen to everything you're saying, just kind of processing through it. There's some things you said that I really agree with, that I really like. I definitely agree with your assessment of the pro-life strategy, like the movement as a whole. That's the movement has failed. That and that not only that it has failed, but the reason that it's failed is because it's unrighteous, right? The idea that we should regulate abortion as healthcare rather than treat it like a murder is a failed strategy, and it's a godless strategy. And so, on those principles, on those ideas, we totally agree. And I think actually, I think Zach actually would agree with that as well. That there are big problems with the pro-life movement from a strategic standpoint, and that the strategy itself is a failed strategy. And so, a lot of what you said there in regards to pro-life strategy just in general, I think he would agree with that as well. Like, we need to transition, we need a different strategy here. This strategy is not working, and not just pragmatically but principally. There's a principle problem with this strategy because it allows for us to celebrate victories that continue to permit for the slaughter of preborn children. I think the difference of opinion actually isn't really principle. I think the difference of opinion is strategic and tactical. And one of the biggest problems, I think, in this discussion so far is that part of the issue is that the people on, when there is a discussion that happens, the people that are on either side of the discussion tend to make the discussion more about principle than about strategy. And I mean, there may be some principle differences. And if there are principle differences, we need to discuss those. But a lot of the differences are strategic. So, like, for example, when we're talking to the average pro-lifer, we're saying, hey, this person is pro-life. They want to end abortion, generally speaking. How do we talk to that person in such a way that we bring them over to our side and say, we're gonna end abortion? You talked about Warren Hamilton and Larry Boggs. I want to push back a little bit on what you said there, because here in Indiana, we had John Jacob's campaign. And John Jacob identified himself as pro-life. Now, he described what he meant when he said that. He said, I'm 100% pro-life. And what I mean when I say that is I want to abolish abortion. And he laid out what he meant by abolish abortion in his literature. And so the person that he was running against was endorsed by Indiana Right to Life. Indiana Right to Life sent literature into the district supporting her. They sent people out to knock doors supporting her. She was supported by them. And yet John ran a campaign, was an abolitionist campaign, talked about trying to bring about the immediate abolition of abortion, and yet said, I'm 100% pro-life. Here's what I mean when I say that. And more people voted for him than voted for her. And so this idea that we have to use these different terms, and if we don't use these different terms, then we're not going to win elections, because then we're trying to out pro-life the pro-life movement. From a strategic standpoint, I actually disagree with that idea. I don't know that strategically that if we use the phrase pro-life, but help people to understand that what the pro-life movement, the movement as a whole, what the movement has been doing is bad, and it's not bringing about the end of abortion. So therefore it's not actually pro-life, which I think is what Zach is trying to say. What these people stand for is not actually pro-life. What would be pro-life is if you made abortion illegal without exception, without compromise right now. So there's agreement regarding that on both sides of the discussion.
Right.
The difference is, how do we talk to people about it? And I think what he's saying is, we can use the phrase pro-life and say, this is what we actually should be pushing for if we're actually for ending abortion. And what we're pushing for is the complete and total abolition of abortion. And we don't have to teach people an entirely different set of terms, or entirely different, sort of a whole different worldview, in order to bring them into what we're trying to do on the political front. We can, like, do what John Jacob says. I'm 100% pro-life. What I mean by that is I want to abolish abortion, which is immediate and total abolition without exception, without compromise, defy the Supreme Court, and so on and so forth. And so I want to push back on that a little bit. A lot of what you said, I agree with as an abolitionist. All of the problems you pointed out in the pro-life movement, I agree with as well. I think the issue is, how do we engage with people that are wrapped up in the pro-life movement and bring them into what we're doing? That, to me, seems like where there's a difference of opinion, not so much about what isn't acceptable in terms of legislation or whatever else the case may be. And so I guess my question is, what I want a little bit more of an apologetic
Yep.
on is, why do we have to, from your perspective, and you were heavily involved with the pro-life movement before now, so I think it's important to get your viewpoint on this. From your perspective, why do we have to use the phrase abolition and we can't use the phrase pro-life? Because if we use the phrase pro-life, then using that phrase is sort of some sort of a compromise, and we're not going to be able to transition people.
Sure.
In other words, I'm sorry, I guess the question's not really clear.
Yeah.
We're drawing a line in the sand.
Yeah.
Why does that line in the sand have to be about the use of the word abolition?
Sure. Yeah, and so by the way, shout out to John Jacob. He's awesome, abolitionist candidate. People should be supporting him whenever he runs for re-election. That guy is awesome. I think the issue is, I guess it's not necessarily that that you can't get elected, if you use the word pro-life, but I guess it's how helpful is it to use the word. So I think when you're speaking to a pro-life organization and you say I'm a abolitionist as opposed to a pro-lifer, that wall is going to go straight up, and you're probably not going to be able to reach that pro-life employee very, very well, because the pro-life employees have kind of all circled the wagons and they want nothing to do with abolition. But your average person out there in the culture, I don't think it's the case that the average person out there in the culture is going to be turned off by someone saying I am an abolitionist as opposed to a pro-lifer. I think that distinction actually is going to be helpful, because it's kind of a new it's a new energizing idea that I think people will get very, very excited about, and I think it is something that you can very easily get elected on. And so I think it might even be, as we talked about, a conflation between kind of how pro-life organizations and politicians react to kind of the pro-life abolition distinction versus how just kind of the average person, the average Christian, or even just the average American citizen out there in the culture will react. I don't think they're going to react negatively to the word abolition. Now, is it necessarily wrong to say that abolition is in some sense pro-life? No, I don't think it's necessarily wrong to say that, but it's just a question of helpfulness. And is that distinction helpful in order for converting people out of pro-life organizations? No. But is that distinction helpful for converting the average person out there in the pews? I think it is. And I think especially, and this is for people who are kind of newer to the movement, that may not have been the case, 4 or 5 years ago. For people who've been doing this for a long time, there was a day when the average person out there in the pew would not have responded. The average person out there in the pulpit would not have responded well to abolition. But we're seeing that change. We're seeing churches. I mean, it's been crazy. Just in the past year, there's been like all these conferences popping up, being hosted by churches, saying, I just want to have an abolition conference at my church. And just the amount of steam that this thing is picking up around this set of ideas, this very strong and biblical set of ideas. And I think identifying those ideas clearly, keeping those ideas clear and distinct from the pro-life ideas, I think is one of the most important things that we have to guard against in the abolitionist movement, because we don't have the pro-lifers outflanked in resources, in connections, in finances, and just about anything. We don't have them outflanked anywhere yet. We're a relatively new movement that is just getting off the ground here. And so we don't have them outflanked anywhere, but where we have them outflanked is a strong, powerful, biblical set of ideas. And I think one of our primary goals has to be keeping those ideas clear, as opposed to some watered down version of the ideas, or something that isn't even the ideas entirely. And language is part of that. Language is part of identifying things in people's minds. And the more people kind of conflate pro-life and abolition in their minds, the less strongly they're going to be able to hold our ideas, the less strongly they're going to be able to articulate our ideas, the less strongly they will be able to act on those ideas. And so we've got to keep the ideas distinct, and a very crucial part of keeping the ideas distinct is keeping the terminology distinct. And so,
can I say something real quick that goes along with what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
And to show the effectiveness of what James is talking about, if you look in this past year, from pro-life organizations bleeding down through the pro-life legislators, you have now, like say in Texas, the not pro-life strategy act, you have the abolition of abortion strategy act.
Yeah.
You have the abolition trigger bill. And you have now these pro-life organizations that are using abolition as part of their tagline because they see the effectiveness and the consistency of the difference between abolition and pro-life, and they're bleeding people. They really are. The more people that come into contact with this ideology, the more people that they are either losing or are recognizing, oh, this thing that I thought was happening isn't really happening, and they're moving over. So in order to stop that hemorrhaging of people, they're adopting our language to confuse the people. And we know this is the case because look at the last two legislative sessions in Texas. We had 8 hours of testimony for the abolition bill. A lot of the people that were there were just average pro-lifers that had heard about this through one of Zach's projects with Jeremiah.
Yeah, Jeremiah.
Bliss, right?
Yeah.
And so that brought a bunch of people over, and well, at least to hearing what's going on. And then this past legislative session, while we didn't have a hearing, we still had multiple sessions of multiple hours where the number of abolitionists that were opposing these bills far surpassed the number of pro-life people going to support these bills, to the point where the pro-life organizations were having the pro-life legislators pick and choose who they wanted to hear, when they wanted to hear them, because you had this whole slew of people that are going to say, hey, your pro-life bill sucks, right? And they don't want to hear, and that's not coming from the pro-choice people. So I think, one, the idea of the importance of the language and drawing just this distinction, even the opposition is recognizing that, which is why they're trying to commandeer the language. But there was something else that I think is also really important that I'd like to see discussed with James. Darren, you talked about winning elections and the importance of winning the elections. I personally, yeah, if an abolitionist wins, yay, that's good. That gives us some help. But really, that's my purpose. Isn't getting folks elected, getting more abolitionists than not abolitionists, even supporting and having a candidate on any level gives us a chance to have the conversation, and it pulls away from the votes that the pro-life person can get, and it shows, like what Zach was talking about, that we can hurt them by removing their votes. So how important, James, do you think the actual winning of, is that the primary focus, to win the election of the candidate or the bill or whatever, or is the purpose to get the paradigm to shift, to get the ideology out there and accepted? Because the two are not mutually exclusive.
Right.
And I think that really gets down to the essence of the difference between what Zach was talking about and what you're saying is, what is the purpose? Is the purpose gaining new legislators, executive, whatever thing, candidate and bills, or is the purpose to inculcate the population with this ideology?
Right. Yeah, no, it's a really good point. So as you guys talked about with Zach, and as Zach talked about as well, our ultimate goal is the glory of God, right? The just bringing the gospel into conflict with all the sins that are out there, and making Christ exalted, making His name known. That's the ultimate goal. And then there's kind of the pragmatic aspects. Now, in abolitionism, obviously, one of the 5 tenets of abolitionism is that we are providential, as opposed to thinking in kind of pragmatic ways. But I would even argue that it is pragmatic. And so I would make both arguments simultaneously. And so on the principled side of it, I think that taking a principled stand, even in an election, is the right thing to do, just from a principled perspective, in terms of helping people see this is a gospel-centered movement, a gospel-centered ideology, and even like preaching Christ, like at rallies and at campaign events or at events to support bills. I think that's very important. Now, I would also say that helps the movement. So something that you guys brought up briefly was the Dan Fisher campaign. Now, Dan Fisher is not the governor of Oklahoma, but he ran to become the governor of Oklahoma, and he ran as a strong abolitionist. Russell was the communications coordinator for that campaign, so it was a very abolitionist campaign. And if you talk to abolitionists around Oklahoma, probably about half of them came into the campaign, came into the movement through the Dan Fisher campaign. So even Warren Hamilton, like the guy who is now carrying the abolition bill in the legislature, he came into the movement. He and his wife Sherry through the Dan Fisher campaign. Ben Bestrom out in Western Oklahoma now has an organization that is pushing abolition and teaching abolition and is going to be supporting abolitionist candidates. He came in through the Dan Fisher campaign. Lots and lots and lots of people. And so drawing that line is really what pragmatically made the abolitionist movement so much bigger and stronger, is the fact that we drew that line. And so I think the pragmatic part is there. I think the principle part, I don't have to tell you guys on that part of it, but just from the pragmatic side of things, I think it's a smart thing to do. I don't think there's anything unelectable about saying I am an abolitionist of abortion. I think that is a very electable idea, and I think people, at least certainly in any district that truly hates abortion, anywhere where there actually is real sameness with somebody about truly wanting abortion to be abolished, they're not going to be turned off by that. And so, yeah, I think it's the right principle thing to do, and I think pragmatically, both even short term and long term, but especially long term, I think it's the right thing to do to keep the ideas distinct, the movements distinct. And we were meeting with me and Russell and some of the pastors here met with a candidate for a very prominent position just about a month and a half ago, and he's looking at this major statewide campaign, and he's saying, man, this guy I'm running with is an incumbent. He's well connected. He's got tons of money. He's got all the money in the world to do everything that he could ever want to do in a campaign and more. How do I have a chance against this guy? And he's telling us, well, I have to draw some distinctions. Like if I run as James Lankford 2.0, I'm not going to have a chance. He's going to blow me out of the water because he has the name recognition, he has the connections and the money. But if I draw some distinctions between myself and him, I say, here's what James Lankford is doing, and this is why it's not good, and here's me and why it is good. That's the only way I have a chance here. And so that distinction, I don't think it hurts. I think that distinction helps, especially for campaigns that aren't going to have as much money as their opponents or as much connections. I think that distinction is the best chance that they have. Now, as you talked about, there's ways of drawing the distinction without saying I am an abolitionist. You can draw a distinction by saying I'm truly pro-life or in other ways like that. But again, there's nothing morally wrong with that at all. I don't think there's anything morally wrong with that. But just strategically, I don't think it hurts to say I am an abolitionist in the short term, and then I think it helps majorly in the long term in terms of helping people categorize truth from error in their minds, to be able to say, this is the word that I'm going to associate with the true and right way of doing things, and here's the word I'm going to associate with the incorrect, kind of worldly wise, kind of unbiblical way of doing things. And so, yeah, I think the short-term benefits are not huge, but I think they're there. But then I think the long-term benefits of drawing the line clearly are very, very significant.
So on that, like thinking through the 5 tenets, one of the things you talked about there was, one of the things that abolitionists are that we're providential. We believe in the providence of God. Yeah. And we make our decisions accordingly. So, and what that means, the way that works out is we do that which honors God, and then we leave the results in God's hands, right? That's what it means to be providential. One of the interesting things that happens in the abolition movement, though, in regards to that tenet, is that oftentimes abolitionists say, well, we're providential, and they'll use that to buck against the concept of being strategic at all.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's what you're saying.
Right.
But I have had these discussions with many different abolitionists. Well, we're providential. Well, you're talking about running a political campaign. We're talking about two different things in this discussion. Zach was talking about when you run a political campaign, you're either running the campaign to win so that you can go to the state house, author a bill, vote against bad things, vote for good things, and those types of things. Use the bully pulpit to raise awareness for what we're trying to do, which is what John Jacob has done a lot of here in Indiana.
Right.
And we had these discussions when we were working on his campaign. You run a campaign to win so that you can do those things, and then as you're running that campaign, you can have discussions about the issue and should.
Yep.
But then there's the idea that you run a campaign and you don't care whether or not you win because you're only running the campaign to discuss the issue. Now, here's the thing about that. In my involvement in politics over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, I have never seen a abolitionist candidate send out a fundraising letter that says, we don't care whether or not we win. We're just trying to have a discussion about the issue.
Right.
They send out a fundraising letter saying, I'm hoping to be elected to this office so that I can protect the preborn and pass this abolitionist legislation and so forth. Now, here's my argument with that. If you are running a campaign, you don't care about whether or not you're winning, so you're not going to apply political tactics. You're not going to think in terms of political tactics when you run the campaign. The only thing you're trying to do is have a discussion about the issue. If you want to do that, that's a fine thing to do, but you should be honest with the donors that that's what you're doing when you're raising money for your campaign. Because oftentimes when I see abolitionists that are running political campaigns, I see donation letters and fundraising stuff and so forth that says, I want to win because I want to end abortion. And they're saying, I want to win, donate to my campaign so that I can win, so that I can go do these other things. Those are two very different things. If you're not trying to win, I mean, maybe you might hope that you win, but you're having the campaign just so you can discuss the issue. And you're telling people that you want to win because you're trying to raise money. To me, I find that to be a very problematic thing, right? So if you're trying to win, it's okay to discuss the issue and to draw those distinctions. As a matter of fact, one of the things you and I agree about, James, is the necessity of drawing those distinctions. That's an important thing in a political campaign. If you say, well, I'm pro-life and he's pro-life, we're both pro-life, you got to check marks, you got to check on both sides of the campaign. And then basically what you've done is you've taken the preborn out of the discussion for the campaign. You don't want to do that. You want to draw the distinction so that you can have the discussion. That's important to do. But the thing that we're disagreeing about, I think, isn't principle. It's strategic. We should agree principally. When a politician votes or supports, has a bunch of fanfare around voting for a heartbeat bill, for example, that's a principal problem, right? They're voting in favor of something that permits the slaughter of preborn children. That's a principal problem. But we're talking about, we want to be providential, and we're talking about running political campaigns, and we're talking about the way that we go about talking, the way we go about writing letters, the way we go about sending out literature, the way we go about doing the stuff that causes people to vote for us in that campaign. We should draw a distinction. We should discuss the issue. But if we're saying that we're trying to win, then we should be politically strategic in the way that we go about doing that. We should draw the distinction. We should discuss the issue in such a way that we're trying to communicate to the voters, vote for me because I'm the one that you really agree with. And so being providential and being strategic are not at odds with one another, but there's two different ways of running a campaign here. And I feel like if we're going to talk about just running political campaigns for the sake of having the discussion and growing the movement, we should be honest that that's what we're doing when we're out there raising money for the campaign. And then we should recognize that there's a distinctive difference between the way you go about running these two different kinds of campaigns. The person who's running the campaign to win is going to run the campaign differently than the person that's just running the campaign because they want to have a discussion about the issue. And so to be honest with you, I don't see a lot of distinctive in the way that those two people talk about their campaign. And
Well, I
I
don't know. Let me push back on that a little bit there, Darren. If you go back and listen and read everything that Dan Fisher said in his videos, in his articles, if you look at anything that he said, he made that very clear. He was like, I don't want to run. I'm doing this because this is a just cause. If I win, this is what I'm going to do. But he laid out everything that you said. I don't see a candidate doing these things. He asked for money, he asked for donations, but he was very clear that his purpose in running was to inculcate the population with this idea. Now, his campaign, I think, was very successful. Sure, he came in third with what, like only 10% of 10,000 votes versus 150,000, right? He
yeah.
came at the top of the pack of the not even close people. That's huge as far as like numbers for a candidate running a campaign. I think he ran a serious campaign of sorts, but he was very clear that what he wanted to do if he won, but that the purpose of him running was to make these distinctions so that people would see the difference on a statewide scale. Now look at what has happened over the past 2.5 years since then. Look at the bills that have been brought forward, how they've had to strategically kill those bills, and what the average person going to those hearings are now doing when they boo these bills that are coming out. They've canceled their pro-life uh, gather around the Capitol building, give everybody a rose thing, and people are coming to the abolitionist ones. They have to talk in terms of abolition now because of that campaign. There are people that have moved into more of an abolitionist mindset specifically because of that big drop card that was Dan Fisher. Not because Dan Fisher was a flash in the pan, you're going to remember that guy and his name, but the idea behind what he was saying was so radically different and controversial that it forced people to either go, no, I'm sticking with my Greg Treat guy because he said this, or it's, hey, why are you guys really doing this up at the Capitol? I think that's the essence of what we're talking about. Is the campaign important? Sure. Do we want people to win? Yeah, I mean that helps us with votes and it helps us get a bill in. But what we're talking about is what is the thrust? What is the main purpose? And I think that's where the distinction, we start really seeing the difference between Zach's camp and what James is saying when it comes to these candidates. Are we pushing a candidate with the end goal being this candidate is going to win? That's what my focus is. Or am I using this race, sure, to win, and I can do strategic things with it in the Capitol, but really what I'm trying to do is inculcate the population and force the conversation to happen.
Right.
Yeah, I agree that that's where the difference of opinion is at. And I think that Dan Fisher's campaign is an exception. Like, I agree with everything you said about Dan Fisher's campaign. So I shouldn't say I don't see anybody doing this. I did see Dan Fisher doing that. And so I do think that Dan Fisher's his campaign is an exception when it comes to that. There's another difference though. So the difference regarding what we're trying to do with the campaigns is one difference. There's also a difference in the order in which we're trying to make things happen, right? So, because what these people over here, let's say these are the people that are saying we're running the campaign for the sake of having the discussion because we're trying to inculcate these principles and so forth. These people over here are saying we're running the campaign because we want to win, we want to carry legislation, we want to win in the political arena. These people over here that are trying to win in the political arena are saying, if we change the law, that will go a long way toward changing the hearts and minds of the people. That will go a long way toward inculcating the principles and things that we believe into the people because the law is a teacher. These people over here are saying we need to be changing the hearts and the minds of the people so that ultimately we can eventually change the law. And neither one of those are contrary to the principle to the tenet of the providence of God, I would argue. And I think sometimes I've seen both sides sort of disagree with one another about that. I don't think either one of those are contrary to the principle of the providence of God. In fact, I think both of them can be very much consistent with the principle of the providence of God. But where the rub comes in is there's actually two different views. The difference in opinion about political campaigns comes from two different views about how we're going to bring about the transition that we want to see
Right.
happen. Everybody agrees about what the transition needs to be. Everybody believes that the pro-life movement has failed. Everybody believes that legislation that incrementally or that regulates abortion is ungodly and sinful. Like, everybody agrees about all that. The disagreement is about how are we going to strategically, how are we going to get from where we're at to where we're going. And so when we're talking about drop card campaigns, which I've heard, like Josh, for example, and some of those
Right.
guys, and I think some of what you've talked about today, James, nothing wrong with a drop card campaign. It's good to run a campaign to have the discussion, but the two different ideas are: one is trying to win in the political arena first and then engage the hearts and the minds of the people. The other is trying to engage the hearts and the minds of the people first. If we win in the political arena, fine, but the primary idea is bringing about the paradigm shift that the guys at For the States talk
Right.
about so often.
Yeah.
What I would argue, James, is that if you these guys over here are actually trying to bring about a paradigm shift as well. They're just trying to go about doing it from a strategically different perspective, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree that the law is a tutor, and that passing the law that says abortion's murder and the preborn children shall receive equal protection is probably the best way possible to educate the culture that abortion's murder and that the preborn are human beings made in the image of God. I absolutely agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. So when this group of people, so when we're talking about political campaigns, and we're talking about political campaigns just because that was the example that Callie
Right.
used, but we could take a million other things that we do, activities that we do, that many of us have different. Well, we're doing this for this reason. Well, no, we're doing this for this reason, but we're doing the same thing. We're running a political
Right.
campaign because we're trying to abolish abortion. To me, I would argue we should be able to have a discussion about the difference in strategy and be able to say, yeah, but we're fighting to end abortion. Like, we're all working together to fight to end abortion, right? I've had this discussion with Zach as well. Like, the guys at Free the States are fighting to end abortion. The guys at Action for Life are fighting to end abortion. There's a strategic difference here.
Right.
And I think that's the point that I want to push home. And then I got another question for you. There's a strategic difference here, but it's a difference in strategy, not principle. And that means that we should discuss it differently than if it were a difference in principle rather than strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. And just to kind of go back to the last point for a minute, I think part of kind of the disagreement and the last back and forth may have come from certain abolitionists not maybe communicating accurately what we meant by things. And so, for instance, when we say, I wasn't, part of the Dan Fisher campaign. I don't know how exactly things got communicated. It was not that they weren't trying to win. Like, they were working absolutely as hard as they could to try to win that race. But at that stage in the abolitionist movement, with that being really the first time that Oklahoma voters have ever been exposed to the ideas, with the fact that Dan Fisher had like 1/28 as much money as Kevin Stitt had, you just realistically knew at that stage in the movement, unless God brought revival to Oklahoma, it wasn't going to happen realistically. It doesn't mean we're not trying to, but it just means realistically, it just wasn't probably in the cards. Now, I remember reading an article. I was in Ohio. I'd actually come through. I had met abolitionists during the Dan Fisher campaign, actually in Seattle during the Origami Butterfly Project. And then when I was moving to Ohio to join that pro-life organization that I worked for, I came through Oklahoma City to interview Dan Fisher and do a Q&A with him that I published in the header lesson. So I actually met Dan Fisher and met some of the people associated with that campaign. Where was it going? I lost my train of thought.
Hate it when that happens. Happens to me all the time.
Oh my goodness. I had a point I was very excited to make.
Dan Fisher was trying to win was the point that you were trying to win. He was trying to win the campaign. Callie can cut this part out.
Yeah.
When you
No. Yeah, I can cut it out.
Um,
Super easy.
he was trying to win. Trying to win. Oh yes. Okay, I remember. And so I'm at the campaign. I get to Ohio, and I'm watching from afar, and I'm rooting from afar, and I'm trying to get my pro-life employers to kind of maybe support Dan Fisher as much as I'm able to get them on board with doing that. And I think I actually convinced them to put out a Facebook post in support of him when it got close to the election. I think that post got deleted later, but I got them to at least do that. But anyway, so I'm watching from afar, and I'm reading all the articles about it. And I remember like 2 days before the primary election, I remember reading an article from someone who had just done a poll of Oklahoma, and I remember them saying like, Dan Fisher, like no one's ever heard of this guy really, but he's going to shock a lot of people with how well he's going to do. He's not going to win, but he's going to do very surprisingly well, and he's going to be above 5 or 6 of these other candidates who were expected to be front runners in this campaign. And so I believe that he wouldn't have done nearly as well as he did unless he had distinguished himself from the field. Like that was his thing. That was his way of standing out, saying, I'm different. These guys are bad in this way. They're all running to regulate abortion as the pro-life movement does. I'm running to completely abolish it. And so again, I would not in any way pit, providence against true pragmatism. I think providence and true pragmatism are going to lead you in the same direction. I think providence and worldly pragmatism are going to lead you in opposite directions. Yeah. And so I wouldn't pit those. I wouldn't pit those two things against each other. I think I would argue that it's both a good thing to do in principle and pragmatically to draw that line of distinction. Because again, to draw that, I mentioned this earlier, but just to reiterate it, because I think it's a very important point. Your average pro-life organization is not going to want to hear anything that you have to say after you say, I am an abolitionist. But your average average American Christian, truly well-meaning pro-lifer is not going to object to that. They're going to say, oh, that's interesting. This is good stuff. Tell me more. I think that's the reaction you're going to get from just the average well-meaning person who there really is a lot of common ground with.
Yeah, so I wanted to say something back to that. I know the episode's getting a little long, but I think people will appreciate the length of this episode because this is an important conversation. Mm-hmm. One of the things from a political standpoint, which seems to be what we're talking about on this episode, yeah. I guess we're talking about political strategy. So when you're talking about, Warren Hamilton, for example, ran a great campaign.
Yeah.
I followed his campaign in Oklahoma. And man, I mean, he ran a great campaign, and that's hats off to you guys at Free the States and everybody else that was helping him out with the stuff that he was doing. And he was able to educate the populace there in Oklahoma about, I'm an abolitionist, here's what that means, and fill in the blank. One of the things that I think a lot of people that are sort of in professional politics worry about, that are with us, they agree, they want to end abortion, they want to abolish it immediately. But like guys like Zach who are in professional politics, one of the things I think they're worried about is it's not so much that people are going to see abolitionists and think, oh, I disagree with that, I don't like that, as they're going to think, I'm pro-life, this candidate over here is saying they're pro-life, and the average sort of low information voter isn't necessarily going to take time to look into what's an abolitionist. They're going to see the literature and think, well, this guy's pro-life, I'm pro-life, this is an abolitionist, that's something different for me, so I'm going to vote for the pro-lifer. And that is, I know that that's one of the strategic differences of opinion. So how would you answer that back?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's kind of a tough one to answer authoritatively. I mean, I suppose you'd probably need to get a bunch of well-meaning pro-lifers in a poll and do a focus group about, how do you respond to someone saying, I am an abortion abolitionist? I mean, I guess there's no way to really prove it unless you really do a poll of well-meaning pro-lifers or something. But yeah, I guess my just kind of speculation on what would happen is that I don't think, if you just say I am an abolitionist and drop it at that, then they're not going to have any idea what the heck you're talking about, and they're not even going to want to look and find out more. Because I mean, there's other people who use the term abolitionist. Like there's people who want to abolish prisons and the police, and they call themselves abolitionists. And so you have to be very clear. I am an abolitionist of abortion. I am running to totally and immediately abolish the practice of murdering babies in the womb, and I'm running
Yeah.
on that platform, as opposed to my opponent who's running to support ultrasound bills and 20-week bans and heartbeat bills. So you do have to explain what you mean. You certainly can't just say I'm an abolitionist and leave it there. But I guess my kind of gut reaction on how a poll would go if you poll well-meaning, the average well-meaning pro-lifer, is that they're not going to have an issue with it. Maybe that would be a poll that, I don't know, some abolition group might do at some point. I don't know. But my guess on how that would go would that people would not have a problem with that. So.
Okay.
So I have two things. One thing about what Darren said and one thing about what James said. Darren was talking about professional politicians or being in the professional political arena. That's the problem. Professional politics. That is why our country has lost its ethical foundation of Christian ethics and liberty that is demanded by that, is because we have political politicians. That's the problem.
So, okay, real quick, Callie, can I clarify real quick?
No, I know that's not what you meant. I was just but
okay.
So and when I say that, I mean the politicians themselves and the lobbyists and the entire system, the whole professional aspect of politics is horrible. A. B, what James said, I'm going to pull a James real quick. So, man, what was I thinking? What was there?
See, now you can leave it in now because you did it.
Right, yeah. So, what did James say that I wanted to make a comment on? I actually don't even remember, but it was.
So, did it have to do with the Fisher campaign and trying to win?
No, it was some of this recent last lesson that he was talking about.
The average pro-lifer won't be offended by calling yourself an abortion abolitionist, or.
Yeah. Oh well. I guess it wasn't important. If I remember, or if I go back and play it again, then I will.
Okay.
So one other, I know we're coming close to the end, but there's one other thing I want to discuss just here at the very end, because I think it's important from your perspective, James. And I want to get this in the discussion, even though we've talked about this on the other interview that we did, but I think it's important for people to hear, because I think that it does very heavily favor your side of the discussion in regards to your transition from being pro-life to abolition. Right. So to give people a little background that haven't heard the story, you used to work with Created Equal. And so you worked in a pro-life organization, and you trained people and, went on the streets and so forth. And then at some point, a transition happened and you became an abolitionist. For you, in your own testimony, as you made that transition from Created Equal to Free the States, and you made that transition in principle from being pro-life to being an abolitionist, regulating abortion is no longer okay. We must put an end to it, period. We must abolish it. How important was having that hard and fast line there for you as you made that transition from one to the other?
Yeah, and so it's a great point. So at first, I think there's kind of a transition that every abolitionist kind of goes as they become an abolitionist. And so at first, I didn't quite understand it, and so I thought, well, if the abolitionists had just been nicer, and if they had not kind of said abolition good, pro-life bad, then maybe this whole conversation would be much different, and maybe all these pro-life groups would be abolitionist groups, but by this point. And so my mindset as I was, kind of transitioning toward abolitionism was, I'm going to be the nice abolitionist, and I'm not going to say anything that's going to be offensive. I'm not going to give them anything to rightfully object to. And these ideas are just so good and true and biblical. How could anyone possibly reject this, right? There's no way. There's no way anyone could reject this. And so I'm the nice abolitionist. And yeah, and then pretty soon I discovered that it wasn't, this isn't to say that there's no abolitionists out there who's been mean or that they've been more abrasive than they have been. I'm sure that's happened on a number of occasions, that some abolitionists are overly abrasive. But what I discovered is that that's not why pro-lifers, specifically pro-life organizations, reject it. They were rejected because the ideas are offensive. It didn't matter how nice I was, how kind of we're all in this together I was, how much I tried to not kind of paint them as bad and abolitionists as good. It didn't matter how I phrased it; they were not going to go for it. If you put a gun to them, I mean, they weren't going to go for it no matter what. And I remember a conversation I had with a woman back from my hometown very early on. And this was someone who I'd worked with on some like, keep biological men in men's locker rooms and biological women in women's locker rooms. And we worked on a campaign statewide in Washington on that together. So she knows me. She knows I'm not like some, awful, evil person who hates women or anything like that. But when I brought abolition to her, I was like overly nice. Like I nuanced the heck out of everything I said, qualifications everywhere, super duper nice. And she just lost her mind on me. And I think she works for CareNet in Washington State, and just absolutely lost her marbles. And then I said, like, hey, would you be willing to meet up for coffee to talk about this? Maybe the internet medium is kind of skewing things. And she was like, I think even seeing you would cause me to sin in anger. And so it's not. It wasn't how I put anything. It wasn't that I said you're over here and I'm over here. It was the ideas. And I think that's important, especially for newer abolitionists to get, who kind of want to avoid the friction. It's unavoidable. It's with the pro-life organizations. There's no avoiding it unless you water down the ideas, and obviously we can't do that. And so I don't think kind of adopting pro-life language is going to get people as far as they think with pro-life organizations or politicians or whoever. It's not that. It's not that type of thing that offends them. It really is the ideas. And so pretty soon after I left Created Equal, I realized that, and that's when I kind of more just outright started saying, yeah, I am an abolitionist as opposed to a pro-lifer. But it does take some experience with that for that to make sense to people. So I totally understand how for like newer abolitionists or even for whoever, how that would be a point. That it takes some experience with people like that for this concept to make sense. So.
Right, because these organizations, they understand the line that's been drawn in the sand, and they actually agree with it. They actually agree that there is a line. That line should be there.
Yeah.
And, so they recognize it. I do remember the thing I was going to say to James. He talked about abolishing prisons and the police. This is not to say that we don't think that is a great and biblical idea, because they are. It's just that's not what we're talking about. Right.
Yeah.
That is an important distinction, though, because I would be more than happy to abolish both of those two things for the opportunity to present itself. But,
theonomy.
Okay, so what's that?
I said theonomy. That's a good discussion.
Yeah. We're coming to the end here. I know this episode's been a little bit longer than normal. I appreciate those of you that are listening that have been hanging with us the whole time. James, I appreciate you.
Yeah.
I know there's been some pushback and back and forth, but I very much appreciate you, Free the States. I think you know that.
Yeah.
I love you guys, and I'm thankful for what you guys are doing out there. So normally we try to end the. Well, did you have anything else you want to address before we wrap it up, Kelly?
No.
You sure you didn't have anything and you forgot?
Yeah.
James, do you have anything else before we wrap it up here? I'll give you an opportunity.
Thank you guys so much for having me on. This is an important discussion. I hope lots of people watch and lots of people have discussions based on this. Really appreciate both of you guys, the stuff you guys are doing. And I was going to mention this earlier in the podcast, and then we got going on to another discussion, but really appreciate the fact that you guys do the street ministry portion of this podcast. And I would just encourage everyone listening to get involved in that. There is, yeah, I mean, a lot of people talk about going, to missionary projects overseas and stuff, and that's all good. But you're living in a country that needs missionaries right now. Your neighborhood needs missionaries. Your local abortion clinic needs missionaries. So get out there, get doing that. And yeah, really appreciate you guys. People should definitely, obviously, you guys plug yourselves. People need to get connected with Abolishing Abortion in Indiana. People need to read Callie's book and do all this stuff. And so yeah, people get out there, get Abolishing Abortion.
Amen. That's a good word. I appreciate that, brother. Appreciate that. So, Callie, usually we close it out with a word of encouragement here. I'll do you first, and then James. That was a great one you just gave, but you can give another one here.
Cool.
What off of this discussion, you want to close it out? Any kind of encouragement you want to give people as we finish it
Yeah.
up?
We've been dealing a lot with political stuff recently, and that's not the be all end all of the movement or what we do in general. We
Amen.
just happen to be in the season of the legislative season, so a lot of what we're talking about is the political aspect of this. Um, but where I want to encourage people is, what does it mean to be a good citizen? You know, what does it mean to apply the mind of Christ as an American citizen? Now, I don't believe it means that you have to vote or that you have to do X, Y, or Z. But what does it mean? So that's where I'd like people to start thinking in terms of biblically. What does it mean to be involved as a good citizen, engaging with the culture, engaging with politics, and engaging with my friends, my coworkers, my members of the congregation that I'm in, as a pastor, or as just a congregant engaging with the pastor? How do I take these ideas and engage with them as a good citizen, like I'm called to be? So that's where I would like to encourage people. Look at all of these different discussions and ask myself, okay, what does it mean to be a priest in God's kingdom here, applying the mind of Christ in culture, in the political realm? How am I to be a good citizen and walk away from these conversations with a clear conscience on how I apply that?
Amen. Amen. That's a good word. James, what about you, man?
Yeah, I would just encourage people. There's a lot of there's a lot of hard discussions, and this kind of goes along with what I was just saying. There's a lot of hard discussions to be had, a lot of debates to be had within the movement. But I would just encourage people to keep their eye on the prize, keep their hand to the plow, because we are gaining so much momentum. The stuff, all the stuff, like
Amen.
half the stuff I don't even know what's going on. I'll just hear about this. Hey, some conference happened in Missouri, and like I didn't even know about it. Like there's so much stuff going on. Like some abolitionist is running for governor in Ohio now. Like there's so much going on, so much ground being made. And so yeah, just be encouraged by that. Don't get discouraged by probably politicians keep killing our bills year after year. It's frustrating, but don't get discouraged by it. Keep your hand to the plow. We are winning the cultural war, and this pro-life game isn't. They're not going to be able to keep it up for all that much longer if we keep working, if we keep gaining momentum in the way that we are. But we've got to keep our hands to the plow on this. Just keep being faithful. Keep influencing in whatever sphere God has given you the ability to influence.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. That's good. I appreciate that. I think I would just close it out by saying, as I've been thinking through this conversation that we've been having, and the one that we had with Zach a couple of weeks back, the pro-life movement is a stench in the nostrils of God. 40 some odd years, 60 million dead babies, and that's not even counting all of them. The idea of regulating the slaughter of innocent children. And so wherever you fall at in terms of the differences of opinion and political strategy or whatever, one conclusion you have got to come to as a Christian is that we cannot continue to do that. We have to do that which honors God, period. And that requires the immediate and total abolition of abortion. That requires no compromise, no exceptions, defying Roe. Those are the things that we agree on. And we need to, we have to hold the line on that. And I think that Callie made a good point, and he made the same point when we talked to Zach the other day. Sometimes that involves politics. Sometimes that involves standing outside the abortion clinic, pleading with mothers not to murder their children. Sometimes that means dropping drop cards on cars as you're coming out of the restaurant. Sometimes it just means loving and discipling your own children and grandchildren. And that's what we have got to do as Christians. And Our enemy is not just the pro-abortion movement. Our enemy is the pro-life movement that allows for the continual slaughter of innocent children. And so, however we go about going from there to where we need to go, which is bringing about the abolition of abortion, that's where we got to go to, and we got to fight to get there. And I agree with James. I think having some of these difficult discussions, they're important, but keep your hand to the plow and stay busy about the work uh, of bringing the gospel of Jesus Christ in a conflict with the idolatry of our day. And so, until next time, I want to invite you to join the resistance, the world of sword of truth. Our Lord has left us here to navigate through this world as priest in the kingdom of God. Apply the mind of Christ and battle against the culture that hates God and loves death.